first time in American history, the Supreme Court ruled that when the Second Amendment says there's a right to keep and bear arms, that means a right to carry a handgun outside the home for self-defense. The court struck down a New York law that required showing a special need beyond a general desire for self-defense to get a permit for carrying a concealed gun in public. By a vote of 6-3, the court said no other constitutional right requires showing some special need to exercise it, and that's not how the Second Amendment works.
The Supreme Court just recently struck down a 100-year-old law that restricted the carrying of concealed weapons in New York City. The decision eliminates the previous requirement that the gun owner must prove the need for having a concealed weapon in public for self-defense. Many gun right advocates see this as a win for Second Amendment freedoms, but there are many others who feel it is not necessary for the general population to have firearms for the purpose of self-protection. There are many in the church even that have strong opinions on this as well. But we have to ask ourselves, what does the Bible say in regards to a person's right to use arms to defend themselves? Now, I want to start this discussion with one of the most popular slogans used by gun enthusiast Christians anytime there is a challenge to the legitimacy of the Second Amendment. Whether it's in a meme, or on an advertisement board outside of a church building, or on a huge billboard, we have seen the statement, Cain killed his brother with a rock. Therefore, it's a heart problem, not a gun problem. They will then usually tag a verse reference like Jeremiah 17:9 at the end to try to codify the biblical authority on the issue. But not only is this flawed in its argumentation, but the statement itself is not biblical. Let's be clear. The passage in Jeremiah 17:9a is true when it states, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. But you cannot use a true statement to try to validate unbiblical reasoning. What do I mean? There is absolutely no evidence that Cain used a rock to kill Abel. Let's just read the text for ourselves. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Genesis 4:8. Notice something. No rock was mentioned. In fact, no tool was mentioned. The passage does mention that he was angry. And so we would do better to argue that Cain's anger is the true catalyst of Abel's death. The reason we need to point this out is that unbiblical arguments by the church have a tendency to further diminish the church's position according to the world. So if you are going to argue something biblically, at least make sure the Bible says what you're arguing. But how would Jesus feel about self-defense? While there are pacifist believers who believe that all violence is wrong, they claim Jesus never resisted his persecutors, and those who followed Jesus were martyred for their faith. However, there are some important biblical concepts that we need to keep in mind on this topic. First, Jesus did not oppose war. In fact, he said that wars would exist until he returns. Also, a Christian is never prohibited from being part of a government, in which our Constitution allows us the right to bear arms as provided in the law by our government. Jesus also allowed earthly governments the right to maintain armies. Cornelius was known as a devout man who feared God, and yet he was a centurion, and as such, he was armed. In fact, the Bible expressly says there is a time for war in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 8. Also, men are commended and found faithful for fighting in wars and eliminating evil, like David was when he defeated Goliath. Hebrews 11:32-34 also states, "And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak, and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, and turned to flight the armies of the aliens." In fact, Jesus was also mentioned as being the leader of the nation of Israel's army in a Christophany recorded for us in Joshua 5:13 through 15. Also, for the record, the word hosts is another word for armies. And in Psalm 46, Jesus is clearly called the Lord of hosts. And he is also called a man of war in Exodus 15:3. But all of this is regarding wars on large scales. What about personal self-defense? Exodus 22:2 states, "If a thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed." So we see clearly here that there is a provision allowed to stop a thief when he is breaking in. Also in 1 Samuel 25:13, we read about David calling Israelite men to strap on their personal swords, which were used in personal battles as necessary. And Psalm 144:1 then says, "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." Now, all of these are good indications. But let's look at what Jesus tells the disciples right before he's crucified. Luke 22:36 says, "Then he said to them, but now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one." Now the people of those days did not have firearms, but they clearly had sidearms. And Jesus told them to make sure they acquired some. Some might ask, why? Why else? Jesus knew there was going to be an assault, and he knew the church that he was establishing was going to come under persecution, including the disciples themselves, and here he is giving them the right to defend themselves. Some will ask, well, why didn't he allow Peter to defend him when he cut off the servant of the high priest's ear? First, remember, Jesus was born to die, and so his death was required. Secondly, he tells Peter to put his sword away, not throw it away, which showed that he had the right to have a sword, and the only reason Peter would have had it would be for defense, whether personal or national. Because of all of this, we can see a clear biblical precedent for the case of using modern weaponry in the day for self-defense. And since a firearm is a modern weapon in our day, the believer may bear it for self-defense if the need should ever arise. This is Frank from Reasons for Hope. Aloha.